Two people can live in the same neighborhood, earn very different salaries. And the person making half the income can end up 10 times more financially secure. Picture two apartments. Same city. Same neighborhood. Almost the same monthly rent. Let's start with the first apartment. The person living there earns about $95,000 a year. On paper, that sounds like success. A comfortable income. The kind of salary many people spend years trying to reach. When you walk inside, the place looks impressive. A massive 75-inch television dominates the living room wall. Beneath it sits a large leather sectional that cost around $4,000. The kitchen is packed with appliances. An espresso machine, a blender designed for smoothies, an air fryer, a slow cooker, gadgets for every possible recipe. Some of them are rarely used. A few are still sitting in their original boxes. Open the closet and you will see rows of clothes stacked tightly together. Jackets, shoes, shirts. Several still have tags attached, bought with excitement but forgotten within weeks. There is even a spare bedroom. But it is not really a bedroom anymore. Over time it slowly turned into something else. A storage room. Old workout equipment, unopened packages, boxes filled with hobbies that were exciting for a month and then quietly abandoned. At first glance, it looks like a life that is working. But something strange happens every time this person opens their banking app. Their stomach tightens. Because despite earning nearly six figures, they know a simple truth that few people around them realize. Two missed paychecks would create a real crisis. Now walk with me across the street to the second apartment. This one belongs to someone earning $52,000 a year. Less than half the income. When you step inside, the first thing you notice is not luxury. It is space. The couch is simple but comfortable. The television is a normal size. The kitchen has fewer tools, but every one of them gets used. The closet contains clothes that clearly belong to someone who actually wears them. The spare bedroom is still a bedroom. Nothing feels crowded. Nothing feels excessive. But the biggest difference is something you cannot see in the furniture. It appears when this person opens their bank account. No tension. No quiet panic. Just calm. Because they have 18 months of living expenses saved. And every single paycheck, 20% goes directly into investments. Same city. Same neighborhood. Yet the person earning almost half as much has nearly 10 times the financial security. When I first started noticing stories like this, it forced me to ask a question that completely changed the way I think about money. What if the biggest factor determining financial security is not income at all? What if the real difference between these two lives is something far quieter, something most people never calculate? Welcome to Dom Finance. I'm Dom. If you enjoy exploring the hidden psychology of money, the systems behind wealth building, and the ideas that can quietly change your financial future, make sure to subscribe to the channel and like this video so you do not miss the next one. Because today, I want to walk you through a concept that might completely change the way you see every purchase you make for the rest of your life. And the more I thought about that difference, the more I realized something unsettling. Most of us are calculating the cost of our lives in a way that quietly hides the real price we pay. There is a simple idea that eventually changed the way I look at almost every purchase I make. At first it sounds obvious, almost too simple to matter. But once it settles into your thinking, it becomes impossible to ignore. Everything you own costs money twice. The first cost is easy to see. It is the number printed on the receipt. The amount that leaves your bank account the day you decide to buy something. That part is visible, concrete, and immediate. But there is another cost that arrives quietly after the purchase. A second layer of ownership that most people never calculate. And over time, that second cost is often larger than the first. Take something simple, like a treadmill. When someone buys a treadmill, they think about the price tag. Maybe a few $100, maybe $1,000. It feels like a one-time decision connected to motivation and health. But that machine does not just exist in isolation. It occupies physical space inside your home. Space that you are paying for every single month whether you realize it or not. A treadmill takes up roughly 20 square feet once you include the clearance needed around it. In many cities, the real cost of housing space can easily translate to $30 or even $50 per square foot each year. Suddenly the treadmill is quietly consuming hundreds of dollars in space every year it sits there. Then there is maintenance. Ownership always brings responsibility. Think about something larger, like a boat. The boating world has a saying that experienced owners repeat almost like a warning: the two happiest days of owning a boat are the day you buy it and the day you sell it. Because boats require constant care. Cleaning, registration, insurance, repairs, seasonal preparation. Industry estimates often suggest annual maintenance costs around 10% of the boat's value. A $30,000 boat can quietly cost $3,000 every year just to keep it. But what surprised me most was realizing that the hidden costs are not only financial. They are mental. Every item we own quietly asks something from us. It needs to be organized, cleaned, tracked, moved, repaired, or eventually thrown away. Each object takes a small slice of attention that we rarely notice until our spaces begin to feel crowded. Researchers studying clutter have found something interesting: environments filled with excessive objects can raise stress levels and reduce our ability to focus. In other words, the things we own are not just filling our homes. They are filling our minds. And then there is the cost most people never see at all. Opportunity. Every dollar sitting inside possessions is a dollar that could have been working somewhere else. A $15,000 home gym may feel like an investment in health, but that same $15,000 placed into a simple long-term investment could grow dramatically over time. When you start seeing purchases through that lens, you realize something uncomfortable but incredibly important. The price tag is rarely the true cost. It is simply the beginning of a financial relationship that continues for as long as you choose to keep that object in your life. Once you begin to see ownership this way, it becomes difficult to look at spending as a series of harmless little decisions. It starts to feel more like a system, and over time I realized that people who seem financially stable tend to follow a few quiet rules that protect them from letting possessions slowly take control of their income. The first rule I began noticing is surprisingly simple, yet it changes how you judge value. Before buying anything, try to imagine how often you will realistically use it. Then divide the price by that number. What you get is the cost per use, and it is often a much more honest measure of whether something is worth owning. A jacket that costs $400 but gets worn for years might end up costing only a couple dollars each time you wear it. Meanwhile, a $300 kitchen gadget that you use twice before it disappears into a cabinet is suddenly one of the most expensive objects in your home. The second rule is a question I now ask myself when I look around my own space. If this item disappeared today, would I actually spend money to replace it? When you ask that question honestly, the answer can be uncomfortable. Many things we own remain in our lives not because they are useful, but because removing them requires effort. They are leftovers from past interests, impulse purchases, or gifts we felt obligated to keep. Recognizing this helps you understand that ownership should be intentional, not accidental. Another pattern I started noticing is how easily people replace things that are still perfectly functional. A phone works, but a new model appears with slightly better features. A television works, but the next version promises sharper contrast. A car runs reliably, but the latest model suddenly feels more exciting. These upgrades rarely solve real problems. They simply feed our appetite for novelty. Over a lifetime, that habit alone can quietly redirect tens of thousands of dollars away from savings and investments. But habits around spending are only part of the picture. Environment matters just as much. People who manage money well tend to design systems that make saving easier and spending slightly harder. Removing stored credit cards from shopping websites, waiting a day before making non-essential purchases, or automating transfers into investment accounts may seem like small actions. Yet those small barriers and automatic habits often shape financial outcomes more powerfully than motivation alone. I also began realizing how powerful simple awareness can be. Most of us have never counted how many shirts, shoes, or kitchen gadgets we own. When you finally do, the number can be surprising. That awareness alone changes behavior, because accumulation is harder to ignore once it becomes visible. Another lesson I learned is to test curiosity before committing to ownership. Renting equipment, borrowing tools, or trying activities without buying everything first allows enthusiasm to prove itself before money gets involved. Many interests fade after the excitement of the first few weeks, and discovering that before buying equipment can save years of unused clutter. Eventually, these habits lead to a deeper realization. Every major purchase creates an entire ecosystem of related expenses. A boat requires storage, maintenance, and equipment. A home gym requires space, flooring, and upgrades. Possessions rarely exist alone. They multiply. And that is why people who build financial stability often decide something very important ahead of time: what enough actually means for them. When you define that boundary clearly, something remarkable happens. Income can continue to grow, but lifestyle does not have to expand endlessly with it. The difference between the two becomes savings, and those savings slowly turn into something far more valuable than any object you could buy. They turn into freedom. And the moment that idea of freedom starts to feel real, you begin to notice something else that quietly shapes people's financial lives: the direction of the cycle they are living in. Most financial lives are not determined by one dramatic decision. They are shaped by small patterns that repeat over and over again, often without us realizing it. Over time those patterns become cycles, and once a cycle begins, it tends to reinforce itself. One of those cycles slowly traps people, even when their income looks impressive from the outside. It usually begins with spending everything that comes in. A paycheck arrives, and within weeks most of it disappears into the normal rhythm of modern life. Rent or mortgage payments. Car payments. Subscriptions. Upgrades. Small luxuries that feel harmless in the moment. New things that promise convenience or excitement. At first, it feels manageable. Life looks comfortable. But when there is little margin left between income and expenses, something subtle begins to grow in the background. Financial insecurity. Not always dramatic, but persistent. The kind of feeling that appears when an unexpected bill shows up. Or when the economy feels uncertain. Or when a job suddenly becomes less stable than it once seemed. And when that insecurity grows, something interesting often happens psychologically. People start spending more. Not because they need the things they are buying, but because purchasing something creates a short burst of control. A small moment of reward. A feeling that life is moving forward. A new phone. A new piece of furniture. A weekend purchase that feels deserved after a stressful week. For a moment, the purchase feels like relief. But relief fades quickly. The financial pressure remains, and now the margin is even thinner than before. So the cycle repeats. Spending leads to insecurity. Insecurity leads to emotional spending. Emotional spending deepens the insecurity. Years can pass inside this loop, and what makes it dangerous is that it often hides behind the appearance of success. A person may earn a good income and still feel permanently one step away from financial instability. But there is another cycle that works in the opposite direction, and it usually begins with something small and almost invisible. Spending slightly less than you earn. At first the difference may only be a few $100s each month. It does not feel dramatic. It may not even feel important. But that small gap becomes savings. Savings slowly become a financial cushion. And once that cushion exists, something remarkable begins to happen inside your mind. Security starts to replace anxiety. When you know you could survive several months without income, the world feels different. Decisions become calmer. Risks feel more manageable. You are no longer forced to accept every opportunity out of financial necessity. Even more interesting is what happens to the urge to consume. Many purchases that once felt irresistible begin to lose their power. Because a large portion of consumer behavior is driven by an emotional search for stability or status. When real financial strength begins to grow, that emotional pressure starts to disappear. Your sense of progress no longer comes from accumulating objects. It comes from watching your options expand. And that is the virtuous cycle. Spending less creates savings. Savings create security. Security reduces the emotional need to spend. Reduced spending increases savings even further. Each turn of the cycle strengthens the next. Over time, the difference between these two paths becomes enormous. One quietly builds resilience and freedom. The other quietly builds pressure and dependence. And what is fascinating is that income alone rarely determines which cycle someone enters. Behavior does. When I think back to those 2 apartments we started with, I realize the real story was never about furniture, income, or even spending habits. It was about clarity. Two people were living only a few streets apart, breathing the same air, paying almost the same rent, moving through the same city every day. From the outside, their lives looked ordinary. But beneath the surface, they were building two completely different futures. One future was fragile. The other was quietly becoming powerful. And the difference came down to something most people never stop to define: what is enough? For many people, the idea of enough never gets answered. Income grows, but expectations grow right alongside it. A better job leads to a bigger apartment. A raise leads to a nicer car. A bonus leads to new upgrades. Each improvement feels reasonable on its own, but over time the lifestyle begins expanding faster than the financial foundation beneath it. The strange thing about that path is that it rarely feels extreme while you are living it. It feels normal. It feels like progress. Yet the result is often a life where income must constantly work to support the very structure it created. But the other path begins with a different decision. Someone decides what kind of life is actually sufficient for them. What kind of home feels comfortable? What kind of transportation truly meets their needs? What level of spending genuinely improves their life rather than simply filling space? Once that definition exists, everything changes. Because from that moment forward, income no longer has to chase lifestyle. Instead, lifestyle becomes stable while income continues to grow around it. And the gap between the two becomes something extraordinary. Savings. Savings becomes security. Security becomes freedom. Freedom to make decisions based on values instead of pressure. Freedom to leave situations that damage your health or your time. Freedom to explore opportunities that might not pay immediately but matter deeply. When I started thinking about money this way, I stopped asking a question most people ask. Can I afford this? Instead, I began asking something much more important. Is this worth trading a piece of my future freedom? Sometimes the answer is yes. Many things are worth paying for because they improve your life in meaningful ways. But far more often, the honest answer is no. The object might be appealing. The purchase might feel exciting in the moment. But when you place it next to the idea of financial independence, the excitement fades surprisingly fast. So if there is one lesson I would leave you with from this entire conversation, it is this. Financial freedom is rarely built through dramatic decisions. It grows from quiet clarity about what truly matters and the discipline to protect the space between what you earn and what you spend. That space is where your future lives. And over time, it becomes the most valuable asset you will ever own. Think about the last thing you bought that was not essential. If that money had stayed invested for 10 years instead, do you think the purchase would still feel worth it today? I would love to hear your thoughts. Leave your answer down in the comments so everyone watching can see different perspectives and learn from each other. And if you enjoy exploring ideas like this about money, investing, and financial freedom, consider subscribing to Dom Finance and supporting the channel. That support helps me keep creating deeper conversations about the choices that quietly shape our financial future.